Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban seen here reacting to the announcement that the NBA was suspending the season until further notice. Cuban shared his reaction following that news.
This is crazy. This can't be true. I mean, it's not within the realm of possibilities. It seemed more like out of a movie than reality. You know what? It's really not about basketball or money. I mean, literally, if this thing is just exploding to the point where, you know, all of a sudden players and others have had it, you think about your family. You know, you want to really make sure you're doing this the right way.
Rudy Gobert he was questionable. He was going to play last night. You had the guy who officiated a Jazz game last week. He was going to work the Pelicans-Kings games last night. And these guys have been around their families. They've been around their kids. They've been around all the workers in the locker room. I think I give Adam Silver a lot of credit, man. Hey, let's shut this thing down and try to figure it out.
That was the Hall of Famer Charles Barkley reacting to the news. Rachel Nichols, kind enough to join us. Thank you for being here. Matt Barnes as well. And before we get into the sound we just heard, I want to mention the Toronto Raptors have announced members of the team's traveling party have tested positive for the coronavirus. I want everyone to keep in mind that Toronto did play Utah on Monday night. We know Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz had tested positive for the coronavirus.
From what I've read,
they're in my ear. Yes, they've tested for it. They have not tested positive. So we want to clear that up. Tested, not tested positive. I don't want to create any more panic on that subject. Max, I will start with you here, though. Your thoughts on what Charles Barkley and Mark Cuban had to say?
Well, I like Mark Cuban's response for two reasons. One, it was a human response. It feels like it's out of a disaster movie, really. And we don't know the full extent of the coronavirus yet and what the results will be. But we're fortunate that it's not so far worse than it is, that the mortality rate seems to be something like 1% as opposed to much higher. But I thought he expressed what a lot of us were feeling, like this doesn't seem real. And then the fact that he's going to work out something to pay workers in the arena who really, are more vulnerable than certainly the executives in his franchise, and figure out how to make sure that they have, that they get paid at least in the near future, and then work out something long term. And then Barkley is exactly right. I don't see how March Madness goes on. And there are various levels of response you can have to this, right? The worst response we've seen from some notables is this is a hoax. That's practically criminally disastrous response. Someone who would call it a hoax. It's the opposite of leadership. And then you down from there to let's joke around, because when you call it a hoax, people shake hands as a joke, and Rudy Gobert does this kind of stuff and maybe spreads it to reporters, thinking it's not a big deal. Down from there is, okay, we need to protect our bottom line and put, that's where Emmert is, I think. Down from there is Adam Silver. I think most people in positions of authority. Let's not panic. Let's see if we can protect the product and the bottom line. But when it becomes apparent what needs to be done, we're going to do it. And so we've seen that level. And I think Barkley is on the Adam Silver side, saying, why wait at this point? So I liked his comments a lot.
Yeah, look, the Toronto Raptors, you just said it, Molly, right? So they've all been tested. They're now self-quarantining for 14 days. I was texting back and forth with Kyle Lowry last night. He was saying they just got off the road from Utah, was their last stop. And he said he was just grateful that he hadn't been around his young children that much, hadn't had that chance to really have that contact with them. But think about if they didn't cancel these games or suspend the season, you would have to take Toronto basically off the schedule for 14 days. And who knows about the other teams, the Celtics, other teams that have played against the Jazz. Would they have to be taken off the schedule for 14 days? So there just wasn't a way for the NBA to continue after last night. And it is astounding to me that other leagues don't see that. We're seeing Major League Baseball going out and playing spring training games. Do they just not understand how this works?
In other words, there was a way, Rachel. If Silver was not responsible, there would be a way, an irresponsible way to go forward, and he did not opt for it.
But how would you do it? Would you just take them? I mean, if you were bullheaded and pig-headed and wanted to say, I'm going to keep going, how would you even do it? Do you just take those teams off the schedule? I mean, you're not going to have states. We're already seeing states saying you can't have gatherings in California of more than 250 people. Do you think that they would let people who they were known exposed to the coronavirus travel into the state? They wouldn't do that. And so it's just kind of strange to me that we're seeing other leagues not take what happened in the NBA last night and say, okay, we just need to change our thinking.
When you have the opportunity to be proactive rather than being, I mean, it's really all reactive at this point, let's be honest.
Right. No, I think the NBA is, as we talked about yesterday, just taking a step back. Like Adam said, we don't need to panic. Let's figure out what exactly we're dealing with. And over time, we're going to be able to do that. The fact that the NCAA persists on still playing just shows that they've never really cared about their product anyway. This is another example of it's always been about the money within the NCAA, and it's disgusting. So from a player standpoint in the NCAA, and you see some fans, the kids need to play, this is their last chance to play, we get that. So that's why I said on the last show on Get Up, let's clarify suspending the season and not canceling it. Let's take some time and understand that this is just going to be suspended. It can possibly be played in April or May. It's not canceled yet. So I think it's important to clarify that as well.
And Mark Cuban on Get Up this morning said that he anticipated 60 days, maybe, of the NBA regathering itself until all of this passes. So I asked him, okay, 60 days, let's do the math. Could you see the NBA season extending into August? And his quote was, absolutely, Stephen A.
Well, of course, because they're not worried about Major League Baseball compromising their bottom line. Let's just call it what it is. The fact of the matter is that America's national pastime has lagged behind in terms of, just ingratiating themselves with the younger demographic and really building their product and their brand. When you look at the average age that follows the NFL, when you look at the average age that follows the NBA, it's in the 40s. And then you ask that same question about Major League Baseball. And I think the last time I checked, the number was like at 54 years of age or whatever.
I think it's deceased in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, how about that? That's a good point, Matt. And so my point is that clearly you haven't done a good enough job of ingratiating yourself with the growing audience that is out there. They've gone in a different direction. As it pertains to Barkley, I totally agree with you there. Let's modify our verbiage to some degree in terms of not cancellation, postponement, suspension. Okay, we think about the Atlanta Hawks owner, and we see a guy that's talking about how the season should start in December, and all of a sudden, it would end in July or early August. Well, guess what? If you know and you believe there's evidence that shows that it's still going to be profitable, maybe even more so, because from October through December, you're not competing with the National Football League, then all of a sudden, that elevates your brand even more if you're the NBA. And then, of course, you got competition in Europe, especially during the summertime or whatever. Well, if the games are still going on in the NBA, championship, playoff rounds, championship, that would benefit. So we see a lot of stuff that gets attached to this, and we see the potential benefits from it. You don't want to use that word in a particular situation like this, but you see it from a business perspective. But it also, again, reminds you, and it makes it even more inexcusable why the NCAA has taken the position that they have taken, because there is no excuse since the NBA pushes their season back. Why couldn't you have May Madness in college basketball?
Okay, does anyone here would I like to see the NBA in the summer? Sure, of course. Why? What was it? In other words, life is going to go on for most of us. The congressional doctor said yesterday between 70 and 150 million Americans, he predicts, will get coronavirus. The issue is that we don't get it all at once, because if we get it all at once, the system's overtaxed. And the mortality rate that's at 1% now, it looks like, goes up. And who does it hit? Our most vulnerable, people without access to medical attention, the elderly, and the like. And so for them, life won't go on. For most of us, it will. So let's make sure life goes on for as many of us as possible. That's the first thing, so you contain the spread. And then the second thing is, when life goes back to normal, which people, no one knows exactly, but the leading experts seem to think it's going to be several months. You pick up where you left off and play basketball. I'll be watching.
Well, this is what's so interesting, is that the NBA has really, for the past 2 or 3 years, been wringing itself in knots over how do you change the schedule. To your point, Stephen A., about competing, which sport they're competing with, maybe shifting to competing with baseball instead of competing with football. But also, do they shorten the season? Do they hold some sort of mid-season tournament? Guess what? This season is getting a mid-season break, right? It's not quite the mid-season, but they're getting that break. They might get that shift in schedule. They probably will have some sort of shortened season. So it could fast forward to your point that the Atlanta Hawks CEO said, we want to start in December. That could happen if these games are pushed until August. They're not going to start right back up again with training camp, Matt, in October.
What if it's pushed to July, but because of this, we learn in the future, like, hey, the NBA decides during the midseason, you take a 2-week break.
Right.
Take a 2-week break. We
were talking about that. I think we were talking about that, if there's any kind of silver lining, and it's hard to address it now, but you give these guys a break going into the playoffs. You build the anticipation of the NBA coming back, and then you're giving the best players in the world an extra 2, 3, 4 weeks off. The energy in the playoffs is going to be off the charts. It's going to be the best playoffs we've seen because everyone is fully rested and fully healthy. So people have to keep that in mind as well.
In 1981 in baseball, there was a players' strike. And as a result, they suspended play for a while. They played about 110 games, I want to say, and not even everyone played the same number of games out of the 162. And they had the first half winner play the second half winner. And anyway, I remember that season. I was like 8 years old, right? But there's an asterisk there, right? Like, we know that something weird happened that year. We will know that about this NBA season too. But there's no reason that you can't crown a champion and get back to business as this subsides.
You also got to pay attention to the fact that a lot of people are not going to care about that. I'm talking about the asterisk in this regard. If something is compromised, like with the Astros, we got a World Series, and you tried to cheat your way to the title with the mechanisms in center field and all that stuff, gaining an unfair advantage, or the steroid era, or something like that. That's different.
That
in
feels
this
like an
particular,
asterisk.
that's right. In this
is like a
particular
lockout
instance,
season.
excuse me, in this particular instance, it's like, hey, look at what has happened, and all of us are subjected to the same identical conditions. So we're not going to look at them and say, you know what, this happened, and as a result, the championship. And I'm not saying you were saying that, but it's not going to say, oh, the championship, there's an asterisk there. It's not, it's compromised. No, everybody's under the same condition.
That's right.
Everybody's got the same amount of break, the same reason why is associated with everybody. And then once the season resumes, we'll look at them legitimately.
There will be some teams with excuses. I mean, for fans.
Nobody's going to hear them.
For example, if Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid get healthy, because they got I'm serious, because they got a couple months off.
It's a pandemic, Max.
I'm not trivializing it. What I'm saying is when this plays out and life goes back to when the NBA gets back to normal, there will be some teams that were advantaged by the rest. There'll be other teams that felt they had momentum that were disadvantaged by it. When I say asterisk, I don't mean that people won't accept the results. It's that we will always remember there was something funky about that season.
We'll remember it, but I believe in a positive fashion in this regard. The more time off you have, think about it. The only conceivable excuse is rust, somewhat your momentum is being compromised. That's it. The rest ultimately makes you healthier, more incentivized, more energetic, which basically dissipates the excuses that you're going to have for not getting it done. It really comes down to may the best team win.
But it's not
you can live with that.
Anything.
You can live with that.
No.
It's not tainting. No.
Absolutely
Not
not.
at all.
All right, Rachel, Matt, thank you so much for being with us. And I just want to clarify
Good to see
again,
you.
the
I
Raptors
like being on
news,
this
the
side.
team announced today that members of the team's traveling party have been tested for coronavirus, just tested. They are awaiting those results. The players, coaches, and traveling staff have been advised to go into self-isolation for 14 days. After the break, the NCAA plans to